Osama Siblani never expected to become a newspaper publisher when he left Beirut 14 years ago for the University of Detroit. Upon graduation, he stayed in the United States and became an engineer. However, in business and at home, Siblani bristled at American stereotypes of Arabs, stereotypes he felt were perpetuated by the American media.
The way that the American people seen Islam was through films, and they were portrayed as sheiks with harem and bloodthirsty. They're rich, but they're filthy. They are not educated, they're terrorists. So this image of the Arabs have created an animosity from Americans towards Arab, a hatred, let's say.
Siblani decided the best way to overcome this image was to start a new career as a publisher. He called his newspaper the Arab American News. In 6 years, the publication has become the largest Arab American newspaper in the United States. Though the paper is designed primarily to serve the Arab American community, Siblani's mission has reached far beyond that.
Born in the heart of Dearborn, Michigan, the nation's Arab American capital, the Arab American News has now published for 20 years. Week in, week out, in 2 languages spanning 2 decades of intense community growth, and world headlines dominated by the Middle East, the paper remains financially independent and editorially courageous. Its success is the most important symbol there is of this country's promise of free speech, and this community's potential for fulfilling it. In 1984, the growing Arab American community in metropolitan Detroit needed a media voice. The Middle East was going through political upheaval that affected American lives and interests. No one told the story from the Arab American point of view. The founders were determined to raise a voice that said Arabs are also Americans.
Of the Lebanese community in Dearborn returned home tonight after meeting with the State Department officials.
A voice that wants to put America's interests
Chris
first.
has more on that part of the story.
Osama Siblani, publisher of this country's largest Arab newspaper based in Dearborn, and Nasib Fawaz, head of...
To get a better understanding of what's going on in the Middle East, we're going to spend some time with a man from Beirut tonight.
Osama Siblani was born in Lebanon. As you just saw, he owns and publishes that weekly Arabic newspaper. Mr. Siblani, thank you for joining us tonight.
Conducted this week by an Arabic newspaper here, found that while most Lebanese Americans sympathize with the hijackers' cause, they condemn their methods.
Many of them are concerned, deeply worried. Osama Siblani is the publisher of the Sada Al-Watan newspaper. That's the largest American Arab publication in the country.
A voice of objectivity and fairness.
And he's joining us now live from his office in Dearborn. Mr. Siblani, good evening. Besides the military option, which was obvious, in trying to deal with terrorism, which clearly has become an increasing danger and threat not only to Americans, but to many people around the world.
I think we should search for the source, for the heart of the issues. I think we should be more even-handed in the Middle East. I think we should look at the Palestinian question, resolve it, put some little pressure on Israel to withdraw from Lebanon, to have good friends and allies in the Middle East, to increase our friends and decrease our enemies.
Arab leaders are cold-blooded murderers who organize and carry out terrorist acts throughout the world. Is that true? And at loudmouth number 1, we have Osama Siblani, the public.
A voice that should not be silenced.
No, Asami.
We don't need their recognition at all. The mythology.
A voice that cannot be silenced.
No compromise. I mean, everyone compromised to create the state of Israel.
A voice that said there can be a Palestine alongside Israel.
All right. I would like to see your people and my people live side by side peacefully.
I would like to see your people. Oh, fine. Okay, fine. Okay.
You like to kill me, I like to live with you. I love you.
I would like to see.
Do the Israelis, do the Jews of this country accept a Palestinian state side by side to live with Israel?
Liar.
Do you?
You're a liar.
Do you?
You're a liar.
Do you?
The Arab American News wanted to find out how its readers feel about the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait.
U.S. deployment of troops in Saudi Arabia, and whether or not the crisis in the Gulf will develop into the war in the Gulf.
A voice urging that the best of American values be exported to the Middle East.
With the deployment of American, few believe the U.S. is stating its objectives in the Gulf honestly. Believe Kuwait's ruling family should not be restored.
Leading of the Arab masses, it's about time to get rid of monarchy and dictatorship and get on with democracy and human rights.
Mr. Siblani in Detroit, do you agree there's a double standard?
From throughout the metropolitan
A voice that broke news when it was happening.
as they try to work to put out a newspaper. Mr. Siblani's credibility has been measured by the quality of his contacts. It is a fact that earlier this evening, 1/2 hour before the attack in the Middle East, Mr. Siblani had reported that information.
I'm also interested in your contacts in the Middle East. I've not forgotten that you called us and told us about a half hour before anybody else seemed to have the word that this attack was going to occur. So clearly, you're well connected in the Middle East.
Had been fired from Iraq.
Mr. Siblani, you
A voice that doesn't shy away from confrontation.
by the United States, do you?
I don't think it's deliberate, but let me say first, yeah, I haven't, so don't please put words in my mouth.
Well, that's
I can speak very well.
Dan, let Mr. Siblani make his point.
How would you characterize Saddam Hussein? You apparently don't accept the Hitler analogy. What would you call this monster?
I'll tell you what was Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein is the president of Iraq. He elected
by whom? Elected by whom?
Elected by the same people who elected by the same people who elected King Fahd, the one that we are defending, or the Emir of Kuwait, who we're trying to restore.
Got you there, Ben. Touche.
The national voice.
Osama Siblani. Mr. Siblani is the publisher of the Arab American News. That well-known paper is based in Detroit.
Government describes as the single most destructive act of terrorism. People connected to the man arrested.
A voice of reason.
Not Mr. Siblani?
No, the message is condemnation.
Tell me about the motive.
Actually, there are no gains. It works directly against the Muslim world.
A voice that does not yield to violence.
This is what Osama Siblani found when he got to work this morning. Piles of glass from a shattered door and window.
This is directly related to the tension in the Middle East, and I would tell people those are cowards, and we should keep the conflict where it is. It's in the Middle East. We can here be civil.
Thank you, Chuck. To talk about what is obviously a very serious subject, let me ask you, the title on your newspaper this week says, landslide victory for Sharon, a vote for war. Well, is that the way you think most Arab Americans feel?
I think most Arab Americans and most Arab in the Arab world, they feel this way. In fact, the world in general, the world leaders are very nervous about Sharon. Sharon had a very nasty history of bloodshed.
The New York City skyline and the nation forever changed when two jetliners crashed into the Twin Towers.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's take a look at your publication called the Arab American News. Following the events of September the 11th, the cover story was "The Suffering Comes to America."